Hi, today we're going to be talking about extended chords, chords that have things like ninths and 11ths and 13ths in them. Let's get right into it. So first I'm going to write out a C major scale. I wrote out the notes in a C major scale and I numbered them as well, and I just kept writing them until I reached the end of my whiteboard. Now normally when you see a C major scale written out, people usually stop like here after the B, or maybe they stop after the C, but they don't keep writing the scale all the way up to the 13th note, right? But you're gonna see in a second why I did that. Now when we're creating chords, whether it's just a simple triad chord or a seventh chord, we make the chord using the 1, the 3, the 5, and the 7th, okay? Those are the notes that we use when we're building. Well, we use the 1, the 3, and the 5 when we're building like a triad chord, like a major chord, minor chord, augmented or diminished chord. And then if we're building a 7th chord, like a major 7th, minor 7th, dominant 7th, any of those kind of chords, then we add the 7th as well. So that accounts for the C, the E, the G, and the B. But what if we want to add in some other notes into the chord to add some interesting colors to the chord? For instance, what if we wanted to add the 2, which is the D, or the 4, which is the F, or the 6, which is the A? Those are sort of the 3 other notes that are left out of the scale that aren't part of those chordal tones. So we would say that the C, the E, the G, and the B are the chordal tones, okay? And then we would say that the D, I'm going to circle them, the D, the F, and the A are our chord extensions. Those are the notes that we want to add to the chord if we want to add extensions. Now, if you look over here, we actually have these chord extension notes written again as the 9th, right? Because the D is the 2nd, but D also comes back as the 9th. F is the 4th, but it also comes back as the 11th. And A is the 6th, but it also comes back as the 13th, okay? Now, the interesting thing about chord names is that in certain chord names, these extensions are referred to using the numbers 2, 4, and 6, but then in other chord names, they're referred to as the 9th, the 11th, and the 13th, okay? And really, they're the same thing. So the 11th is the same as the 4th, right? The 11th is F, and the 4th is F as well. So they really mean the exact same thing, but certain types of chords tend to use the lower numbers and certain types of chords tend to use these upper numbers instead. For example, usually when we have a major or a minor chord, so just a simple major or minor chord, usually then we use like the lower numbers. So for instance, the chord C6 or C minor 6, we are using 6 instead of 13, right? So 6 is the A. We could refer to the 6 as the 6th or the 13th because it's both the note A. But because these are, simple major and minor triads that we're just adding an extension to, we're just using the number 6. For instance, the notes in a C6 chord are, well, we have just a C major triad, so which is C, E, and G. Okay? And then we're adding the 6th, which is an A. So there only are 4 notes in that C6 chord, C, E, G, and A. Pretty simple because it's just a C major triad, plus we're adding the 6th to it, which is A, okay? And so for C minor 6, it's the same concept. We have a C minor chord, C minor triad, which is C, E flat, and G. And then we're just adding that 6th again, which is A. And so, again, 4 notes for the C minor 6. And usually you would see these written with the 6th instead of the 13th. Now, one thing I just want to mention about chord extensions is that no matter if your chord is a major chord or a minor chord, when you're figuring out those notes in the extension, you're always going to still be looking at the major scale. For instance, I'm looking at a C minor 6 chord, okay? So the chord is C minor 6. What's the root note of this chord? The root note is C, right? So if I want to figure out what the 6th is, I don't write out a C minor scale. If I did, I would write out C, D, E flat, F, G, A flat, and B flat, okay? That would be a C minor scale. And then the 6th would be an A flat. But we don't do that. We always write out the major scale of whatever the root note is to figure it out. So in this case, C minor 6, we're just looking at the root note, which is C. We just write out a C major scale, and then the 6th tells us, oh, it's an A. Now, that might seem a little complicated, like, oh, well, if we have a minor chord, shouldn't we use the minor scale? But actually, I think it's simpler this way, because you can just remember that no matter what kind of chord it is, and sometimes you have chords that are neither major nor minor, like suspended chords, right? But no matter what chord you have, you're just always going to pull from the major scale. So I think that actually makes it simpler. So no matter what kind of chord, major, minor, blah, 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 it's always based on the major scale of the root note of the chord. So let's say you're looking at a chord and it says F minor 6. Okay, so, and you're trying to figure out what are the notes in an F minor 6 chord. Let's say you know what the F minor part of it is, but what is the 6th? What is that 6th note? Well, you just look at an F major scale and you pull the 6th note from that scale, and that's what your 6 is, okay? So that's just a quick little side note that chord extensions are always built from the major scale, even if it's a minor chord. Now, back to my discussion about when we're going to use chord extension names as these lower numbers or these upper numbers, okay? We can also think of it as even numbers and odd numbers, right? 2, 4, and 6 are even numbers, and 9, 11, and 13 are odd numbers, okay? So when do we use the even numbers versus the odd numbers, the lower numbers versus the higher numbers? Because, as I said earlier, they mean the same notes, it's just they're different numbers. And I said that when you have like major or minor chords, usually you're working with the even numbers, the lower numbers. On the flip side of that, dominant 7 chords or just dominant chords in general tend to use the odd numbers or the higher numbers. For instance, if we had the chord C13, it's like a C dominant 13 chord. That chord, we're using the 13 to describe the A instead of the 6th. And the C13 chord is made up of, and we're going to get into this more later because in this video I'm going to go in quite into depth into these dominant chords with extensions, but I'm going to quickly mention like the notes in a C13 chord are C, E, G, B flat, so that's like a dominant 7 chord, C dominant C7 chord, but then we're just continuing to add the extensions. We add the 9th, the 11th, and the 13th to it. So we add the D, the F, and the A. So it has all those notes in it, okay? As I said, don't worry if that confuses you right now because we're going to get into that quite in depth in this video later, so just hold on. But just wanted to show you how like this dominant 7 chord uses the 13th while the major and minor chords use the lower numbers. If you're feeling confused, don't worry. Stick with me. It's going to start to all make more sense. Now, I will say that oftentimes chord extensions are written using the odd numbers, these higher numbers, and I've heard people say that it's done that way to remind us that chords are stacks of thirds. So let me just show you what I mean by that. So we have 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13. So what did I do just now? I just wrote out all the odd numbers, right? I did 1, then I skipped over 2, then I skipped over 4. So I just wrote all the odd numbers up here, okay? And it's true that chords are stacks of thirds for the most part. And what does that mean exactly? If we were to count from 1 to 3, 1, 2, 3, that's a third. If we were to count from 3 to 5, 3, 4, 5, that's a third. This is sort of the interval. So the interval between the 1 and the 3 is a third. The interval between the E and the G is also a third, okay? The interval between the G and the B is also a third, okay? Because from 5 to 7, 5, 6, 7, there's another third. 7, 8, 9, that's another third. 9, 10, 11, that's another third. 11, 12, 13, that's another third. So we're just stacking in thirds. So that's another reason why I've heard that with chord extensions, people like to use these higher numbers, so the 9, 11, and 13, rather than the 2, the 4, and the 6. Another reason I've heard is that because when we add some of these extensions within the same octave of the chord, sometimes it can sound sort of like clashing. So sometimes it sounds better to add these extensions up an octave from the chord. That's another reason that maybe people like to use these higher numbers. These are all things I've heard. And really at the end of the day, we just need to know when we come across a chord with a certain name, what does it mean? What are the notes in it? So that's what I'm going to try to break down in today's video lesson. Let me quickly show you what I mean on the piano by how if we're using the extensions within the same octave, it can sound like it's clashing. So let's take, for instance, a C7 sharp 9 chord, okay? So we're gonna look at a C7 sharp 9. And I'm gonna, later in this video, I'm gonna sort of go into more of an explanation as how we find the notes in this chord, but just for the sake of time, I'm just gonna tell you the notes in this chord right now are a C, E, G, B flat, and D sharp, okay? So that D sharp is the sharp 9. This is the extension that we've added. We basically have a C7 chord, which is C, E, G, and B flat, and I'm gonna play that on the piano for you. C, E, G, B flat. That's our C7 chord, and then we're adding a sharp 9, which is D sharp, right? See, the 9th is D, we sharpen it. So we're adding a D sharp. Now, if I play the D sharp up here, well, actually, first I'm going to play it within the same octave. So if I were to play the D sharp within the same octave, it would be right here. And that kind of clashes, right? Now listen to if I put that D sharp up an octave. Ooh, it kind of sounds better, right? Doesn't this sound nicer than this? I mean, it's not like this sounds bad, and within certain contexts it could be cool, but we kind of hear the extension a little more nicely when it's put an octave higher like that, right? So that's another reason why maybe people like to refer to these extensions using the odd numbers that are sort of within the next octave. Now, when a chord is written like sharp 9, it's not telling you that you have to play that D up an octave. Just to clarify, it's not like if let's say you're reading a chord chart and the composer wrote C7 sharp 2, you really wouldn't see this, but it's not like they would write C7 sharp 2 if they want you to put the D sharp like down in the same octave, and then they would write C7 sharp 9 if they want you to put it an octave up. That is not the case. So whether the chord name has the even number or the odd number, it's not telling you where you should put the note. The only time you will know where a composer wants you to put the note exactly is if you're actually reading music written out on sheet music, you know, with the staff, and you see exactly where the notes are on the staff, and the composer has really written in exactly the voicing of that chord that they want you to play. But if you're just reading a chord chart that just has the chord names, like a lead sheet, which is what people are very often reading when they're reading like jazz music. So if you're reading something like that and it just says C7 sharp 9, you can put that sharp 9 anywhere. You can put it up here, here. It really doesn't matter. And you could voice that chord all kinds of different ways. You don't even have to play every single note in the chord. So just so you know, if it's using one of these odd notes, it's not telling you you have to put that note up an octave. I've just heard that one of the explanations as to why people refer to them as these higher odd numbers is perhaps because the upper extensions do sound oftentimes a little bit nicer when they're up an octave, but not always. It really depends on the context, depends on the chord voicing. There's so many things. There's no hard and strict rule. And really you can voice chords in so many different ways. You could just spend so much time studying and learning chord voicings. And I do hope to make lots of videos about chord voicings later down the road, so stay tuned for that. But that's a whole other topic in itself that you could spend years and years diving into. So hopefully everything I've said up until now makes sense. Basically, the main things you need to remember are that 2 is the same thing as the 9th, right? The 4 is the same as the 11th. And the 6th is the same as the 13th when it comes to these extensions. And these are sort of the 9th, the 11th, and the 13th. These are the extensions that we're going to be looking at. These are our chord extensions. And yeah, so let's get into it. Now, in today's lesson, we are going to be focusing on dominant 7 chords, basically alterations of dominant 7 chords, dominant chords with upper extensions. We're going to be exploring that today. And we're going to be looking at a ton of different dominant chords with upper extensions, and pretty complicated ones too. And we're going to be looking at what are the notes in it, how would we go about figuring out what notes are in it, and how we get these names for these chords. So that's what we're going to be exploring today. By the way, if you like this video so far, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps me out a lot. I have an introductory video that goes over different types of seventh chords that I will link in the description below. That's sort of a nice foundational starting point, and this would be sort of like a part 2 video actually. Now let's get into it. I want to first start out with just a regular dominant 7 chord and just sort of remind ourselves what's in a dominant 7 chord. So a dominant 7 chord would be, for instance, the chord C7. You've certainly probably seen a C7 chord before on your music. Its full name is C dominant 7, and the formula for a dominant 7 chord is 1, 3, 5, flat 7. So what does this formula mean? By the formula, I mean that, and actually I'm going to draw a little line here just to keep this separate. Whenever you're figuring out the notes in the chord, there's always sort of a corresponding formula. And all you have to do is you just have to plug in the notes in the scale of the root note into the formula. So what does that mean exactly? That means you're going to look at the root note of the chord. So what is the root note of C7? The root note is C. So then you're going to look at a C major scale, which you see up here, right? And then you're just going to plug in the notes into the corresponding numbers in the formula. So let's just go through it together. So the first number is 1. Which note is number 1 in the scale? It's C, right? So this is going to be C. What's number 3? Well, what's the third note? 1, 2, 3. It's E, right? So E. All right, now we plug in the 5. Which note is 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ah, it's G. And then, which note is flat 7? Okay, well, first let's find the 7. 7 is B, right? And then we're just going to flatten it. So it's going to be a B flat. Make sense? Okay, so these are the notes in a C dominant 7 chord, also known as a C7 chord. Now, let's say we were trying to figure out the notes in a C7 flat 5 chord, okay? All right, well, the formula for this chord is 1. We have, let's first sort of break it down. We have the C7, which is 1, 3, 5, and then flat 7. But it's also telling us we need a flat 5. So we're going to actually change this to be flat 5. So it's 1, 3, flat 5, flat 7. So what are those notes? The 1 is C. The 3 is E. The flat 5 is, well, what's the 5? The 5 is G. So we flatten it. It becomes G flat. Okay? And then the flat 7 is B flat, right? And there you have it. Those are the notes in our C7 flat 5 chord. This chord is also sometimes referred to as C7 minor 5, okay? Or C7 minor 5, written like that. It's just all the same chord, just different names you can call it. Okay, so I condensed this C7 just a little bit to make it a little smaller so that we would have more room to write other stuff. So this is our C7, and as I said, we're going to be looking at all chords that are alterations of C7 chords or C dominant 7 chords today, so that's why I wanted to just keep that there just so that we remember what is in a C7 chord, because we're going to be just altering it. So the next chord I want us to look at is a C7 flat 9 chord, okay? C7 flat 9. Now we're going to start with just a C7 chord, and in this lesson today I want us to sort of try to think really logically, because here's the thing. You're not going to just watch this video and then memorize all the different chord formulas. Like, I don't think it's realistic to, like, make flashcards with all the chord formulas and try to, like, memorize them that way. I think that's just stupid. It's better to, let's try to think practically and understand what's in these chords, and I think if we try to explain it from a practical standpoint, then you can just sort of use your own logic to always figure out what the formula might be from a logical standpoint, okay? So if I'm looking at this chord, C7 flat 9, we're reading it from left to right, right? So the first thing I see is a C7. So that means off the bat, we're going to have that C7 formula in there. So I know I'm going to have a 1, 3, 5, and a flat 7, okay? That's to start with, because that's that C7. But we also have a flat 9, okay? And so all it means is that I'm just going to add the flattened 9th. And so remember, the 9th is D. It's the same as the second, right? D there. So we're just going to add flat 9 like that. And voila, let's write in the notes now. We have C for the 1. The 3 is E. The 5 is G. The flat 7 is B flat. And what's the flat ninth? Well, the ninth is D. If we flatten it, it's going to be D flat. Okay, so to me that's pretty logical, right? The chord name is C7 flat 9. And look, it's just a C7 chord. Here's a C7 chord with a flattened 9 added to it, right? It's actually pretty straightforward. You might also see this chord written as C7 minor 9, like that. It's the exact same chord, okay? Minor 9 or flat 9. It means the same thing. When it comes to the extensions on the chords, and when I say the extensions, I'm referring to like the 9s, the 11s, the 13s, this kind of stuff. If you see like a minor 9, it's the same as a flat 9. And on the flip side, if you see a plus 9, it would actually be a sharp 9, okay? So plus is like a sharp and minus is like a flat when we're talking about these little upper extensions, okay? Now let's listen to what this chord actually sounds like. We have C, E, G, B flat, and then we have a D flat. So now let's do that chord that I sort of mentioned briefly before, which was C7 sharp 9. Okay? So this, it's again, let's try to think of it from a practical standpoint. What might be the formula for this chord? We have a C7, right? So first we know there's a C7 there, so let's write out the formula for C7. We have the 1, the 3, the 5, and the flat 7. And then we have also a sharp 9. And that's all you're going to do. You're just going to add plus sharp 9, like that. So it's 1, 3, 5, flat 7, and sharp 9. Again, you wouldn't need to put that on a flashcard and try to memorize it, right? It's kind of obvious. It's all in the name of the chord. C7 with a sharp 9. It's all there. The information is in the name. So let's just figure out the notes now. So we have the 1 is C, the 3 is E, right? The 5 is G, the flat 7 is B flat, right? And the sharp 9 is D sharp. Okay? So let's listen to this chord now. Woo! That's cool, right? I love it. And as I mentioned earlier, another name for this chord might be C7 plus 9, okay? Remember when I said the plus and the sharp, when we're adding an extension onto it, like this ninth, we would consider an extension. In this scenario, plus and sharp are basically interchangeable. So it's like plus 9 or sharp 9. Same situation, okay? So that's the formula for a C7 sharp 9. All right, now we're gonna sort of combine two of the ones we did earlier. So we're gonna have C7 flat 5 and then sharp 9. So this is our chord, C7 flat 5, sharp 9. So let's break this down. And let's try to be practical about it. So we start with a C7. So first, what's the formula for a C7? 1, 3, 5, flat 7, right? That's the formula for a C7 chord. So that's what we see first. And then we see, oh, but it has a flattened 5. So we're gonna add a little flat there. So it's 1, 3, flat 5, flat 7. And then, oh, we also have a sharp 9. So we're going to add sharp 9, like that. 1, 3, flat 5, flat 7, sharp 9. Now let's figure out what those notes are. So the 1 is C, the 3 is E, the flat 5 is G flat, the flat 7 is B flat, and the sharp 9 is D sharp. And again, for this chord, you might also see it as like C7, the minor 5, and then plus 9. That might be another way you see it written. So instead of the flat and the sharp, we have the minus and the plus. Same chord, just two different ways to write the shorthand name of the chord. Cool? Let's keep going. Now we're going to do C7 flat 13. Okay? So let's check this chord out now. All right, so let's try to be practical about it. We have a C7 chord, and what's the formula for C7? 1, 3, 5, flat 7, right? But then, oh, we also have a flat 13. So, oh, pretty simple. We're just going to add flat 13 there. And so let's plug in the notes now. The 1 is C, the 3 is E, the 5 is G, the flat 7 is B flat, and the flat 13 is A flat. Okay, so those are the notes in our C7 flat 13 chord. Again, you might also see this chord written as C7, then a little minus symbol, 13. You might see it written like that as well. Sometimes people also put parentheses and stuff. It doesn't matter whether there's parentheses or not. It's still the same chord. C7 flat 13, C7 the minus 13, same thing. Let's listen to it. C, E, G, B flat, and A flat. C, E, G, B flat, A flat. Woo! All right, let's make this even fancier. So instead of just C7 flat 13, let's say it's C7 flat 9 flat 13. Okay? We got C7 flat 9 flat 13. Okay, what's in this bad boy? We've got C7, right? So let's be logical about it. C7, we got the 1, 3, 5, and flat 7. Then it's telling us we have a flat 9. Okay, let's add that. And then it's telling us we got a flat 13. So let's add that. Bada boom, bada bang. Here we go. There's the formula. So what are these notes? We got the 1 is C, the 3 is E, the 5 is G, the flat 7 is B flat, the flat 9 is, oh, you tell me, D flat. And then what's the flat 13? A flat. And those are the notes in our chord. C, E, G, B flat, D flat, A flat. Wow. All right, next chord we're going to look at is C7 sharp 11. All right, and again, let's be logical and practical about it. We have C7. Okay, what's the C7 formula? 1, 3, 5, flat 7. And then, oh, it's saying, hey, throw a sharp 11 on there. So we say, all right, I can do that. I can give you a sharp 11. And there you go. That's the formula. 1, 3, 5, flat 7, sharp 11. Pretty straightforward, right? Well, what are those notes? Let's see. We have 1. The 3 is E. The 5 is G. The flat 7 is B flat, and the sharp 11 is F sharp. All right, let's listen to that. C7 sharp 11. We have C, E, G, B flat, and F sharp. Woo. By the way, if you're enjoying this lesson so far, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment to say, hey, it really helps me out a lot if you do that. Also, if you want to practice more of what we've learned in this video, I have a printable PDF summary of the video and a quiz which you can use to go over what we learned in this video. Definitely will help to reinforce the material. I also just have a ton of resources that can help you learn music, get better at music, music theory, all that fun stuff. So check out the links in the description below. That is where the real learning can happen. I'm also in the process of making some courses, and once I do make those, I will add those to the link in the description below. I'm putting a ton of work and time into those courses, so hopefully they will be beneficial, and definitely check those out because, as I said, I'm putting a lot of time into them. Anyway, back to the lesson. So now let's switch gears a little bit, and we're going to look at a C dominant ninth chord. Instead of a C dominant 7 chord, we're going to look at a C dominant ninth chord. And so you might see this chord written like this, C9. If you see a chord C9, that's what that is. That's a C dominant ninth chord. Now, what exactly is inside a C ninth chord? So when you see a chord like this, and actually this goes for all the dominant 11th chords and dominant 13. So if you see like C9, C11, C13, we're gonna sort of look at all these types of chords right now. What I want you to remember is that these are all dominant chords, okay? So they are actually going to all have the notes of a dominant 7th chord in them, okay? So as we go through them, that will become more apparent. So let's just sort of break this down. So this is a moment where we're, you know how I was saying, like, we're using practicality and common sense to try to just figure out what's in these chords. This is where this is something that you're going to need to remember, because this is not as obvious. But this is sort of like, as long as you remember this little rule, then you can always figure it out, and it's pretty obvious, okay? So what I need you to remember is that when we have a C9 chord, a C dominant ninth chord, we also have all the notes that are in a C dominant 7 chord in front of it. So we're going to have that 1, 3, 5 and flat 7 in this chord. We have the 1, the 3, the 5, and the flat 7. Because it's a dominant chord, it's a dominant ninth chord. You could think of it as being connected to the C7 world. It's like the C dominant ninth chord is connected to the C dominant 7th chord. They're very similar. They're both dominant chords. It's really just a C7 chord, but with a ninth added to it. So really, it's a C7 chord, and then we're just going to add a ninth. And it's not a flat 9 or a sharp 9. It's just a regular 9. So our formula is actually just the C7 chord formula, 1, 3, 5, flat 7, and then with the ninth added to it, okay? Now, you might say, okay, well, how come this isn't like a C major 9 or something like that? Because it's not a C major 9. A C major 9, we would have to write it as like C major 9 or C triangle 9. A triangle is a shorthand for major. But if there's nothing in between the C and the 9, if it's just like C9, the same way it's just C7, that means you're looking at a dominant ninth chord, okay? And so when you're looking at a dominant ninth chord, remember, it's part of that dominant 7 world. It's part of that C7 world. So you got the C7 chord, and we're just adding a ninth to it. That's all it is. So let's figure out what these notes are. We have the C is the 1, the E is the 3, right? The 5 is G, the flat 7 is B flat, and the ninth is D. So it's just a C7 chord with a D added to it. So let's listen to what that sounds like. We have C, E, G, B flat, D. Now, what if this chord was C9 flat 5, okay? Like that. So this is now a C dominant 9 flat 5 chord, okay? That's a bit of a mouthful. But if this were the chord we were looking at, it's going to be the same situation, but we're just going to add a flat in front of the 5, so it would become G flat, just like that. So that's all we would do if it were C9 flat 5. And let's listen to what that sounds like. So you might also see the name of this chord as C9 minor 5 or C9 like little minus symbol 5. Same thing, same chord. Just a different shorthand for it. Okay, now we're going to look at C11. And this is where it starts to get interesting. And this is where, as I said, you're going to have to kind of remember this rule. It's not so obvious common sense, okay? So let's say we're looking at the chord C11, okay? So just like C9, this is also, it's a dominant chord. It's a C dominant 11th chord, okay? So this is a C dominant 7 chord. When we said the C9, that was C dominant 9th. This is C dominant 11 chord, okay? Now, the same thing is going on here, that we have a C7 chord. First, let's just write out the formula for C7, which is 1, 3, 5, and flat 7. So same situation here. But now, we're not just going to pop on the 11th, okay? And this is where it's like it's not written in the chord names. Basically, I'd say in this whole video, this is the one thing that's not obvious and that you just have to remember, okay? This is it. Aside from this, though, it's all obvious, I think. So this is the only non-obvious thing that you just kind of have to remember. But as long as you just remember this rule, then you can always figure it out, okay? What we have, we're not just going to add the 11th. So we got up to the 7. We're actually going to add any extension before it as well within these extensions, okay? So that means we're also going to add the 9th, and then we're also going to add the 11th. So it's saying C7, C dominant 7, up to the 11th, but it's saying not just the 11th, it's saying add everything else up to the 11th. So add that 9 too. Make it we're sucking in C7, C9, and C11. So that's why it's going, okay? Just to sort of show you, if we also have a C13. C13 is the same situation. So for C13, again, we're doing the 1, we're doing first, we have the dominant 7, 1, 3, 5, and flat 7. But then okay, we're not just going to add like 13. We're not just going to do that. No, we're going to do everything leading up to that 13 as well. So we're going to add the 9th, the 11th, and the 13th. We're going to add all the extensions, okay? So we have 9, 11, and 13, okay? So there are a lot of note options in a C13 chord. And truthfully, you might not play all of them. Maybe you're just actually going to play the 13th and you're going to drop out the 9th or the 11th. But just know that they are technically notes in the chord, and they're there. They're there for your usage if you want to use them. They are part of the chord, okay? So the reason why we didn't have to do that with C9, so C9, just to remind you, we did C9 previously. The C9 was the 1, the 3, the 5, the flat 7. And so I'm just going to add the 9 on, but there wasn't anything else before the 9th, so I didn't have to add anything else, right? It was just the 9th. Now with the C11th, there is something between the 7th and the 11th, right? There's that 9, so we had to add that. And then with the C13th, we had to add the 9th and the 11th. So basically you just always, with these dominant 7 chords, these dominant 9th and 11th and 13th chords, you're always going to add in the other extensions leading up to it, okay? Or they're technically part of the chord, okay? You don't have to play those notes. You never need to play all the notes in a chord if you don't want to. But what I'm saying is that these are technically the notes in the chord. Now let's go back to this C11 and just focus in on this real fast to look at the notes in this C11 chord. So we have C, E, G, B flat, and then what's the 9th? The 9th is D, and the 11th is F. All right. C, E, G, B flat, D, and F. Let's take a listen to this, okay? We have C, E, G, B flat, D, and F. Pretty. Now let's go back to that C13 chord that I had mentioned previously. C13, okay? So let's again go over the notes in it, and we'll just zoom in a little more closely on this chord now. So we have the dominant 7, 1, 3, 5, flat 7, okay, and then, okay, we need to add in everything else leading up to 13. We need the 9th, we need the 11th, and then we also need the 13th, okay? So let's figure out what these notes are now. We have the 1 is C, E, G, B flat, the 9th is D, the 11th is F, and the 13th is A, okay? A lot of notes, but let's listen to it. C, E, G, B flat, D, F, A. Pretty, right? When you're playing a chord with that many notes in it, definitely we usually start dropping out certain notes. And I said I wasn't going to talk about this much in this video, so I feel like I could make a whole video just about the chord C13. But probably the most important notes in it are the 1, the 3, the flat 7, and the 13. So the C, E, B flat, and A. So that's sort of the most important notes in the chord, I'd say. Anyway, I'm not even going to go down that road right now because, as I said, that's a whole separate video. Comment below if you want to see that video. Now, what if the chord was C13, sharp 11? Okay, well, let's try to be practical about this. We start with a C13, so we did all that work so far. And then it's just saying, make it a sharp 11. So I'm just going to draw a sharp in front of that 11. So that makes this an F sharp instead of an F natural. So let's listen to that, okay? So we have C, E, G, B flat, and then we have D, F sharp, A. Woo! It's a nice chord. Very pretty. So hopefully you understand now what I'm talking about with these C9, C11, C13 chords. Now, the next thing I just want to briefly talk about are C7 sus4 chords, okay? First, let's do C7 sus4. C7 sus4. What a chord. Let's sort of try to be practical about this, okay? So a C7, it's saying C7, so let's write out our C7. 1, 3, 5, flat 7. That's the formula for a C7. Now, the sus4, when we see sus4, what that is always telling us is that it's saying, whoa, I just put marker on my face. My marker just fell on my face. Okay, I need to wipe that off real quickly. Do you see that? It's kind of funny. Okay, I think I got most of the marker off. Okay, so when you see sus4, it's telling you replace the third with the fourth, okay? So I'm just going to take this chord and replace the third with the fourth, okay? That's all there is to it, and those are the notes in the chord. So let's write out the notes now. So the 1 is C, the 4 is F, the 5 is G, and the flat 7 is B flat. So let's listen to what this chord sounds like now. C, F, G, B flat. Nice sus chord, right? So it's really just like a normal C sus4 would be C, F, and G. Like this is a C sus4 chord, but a C7 sus4 chord is just, we're just adding that flattened 7 on it. Nice. And now let's look at what a C9 sus4 chord might be. So let's say it said C9 sus4 instead of C7 sus4, okay? So we're gonna keep the 4 there because it's still a sus4 chord, so we're not gonna have that 3 there. But we're gonna also add the 9th, okay? Just like that. And that's all there is to it. So what's the 9th? The 9th is D. And there we go, voila. C, F, G, B flat, and D. Let's listen to that. C, F, G, B flat, D. Nice chord. Okay guys, I think that is it for today. That is a lot of chords I just threw at you. Remember, if you want to review this more, I have printable PDFs with worksheets and quizzes. I have tons of materials to help you get better at music theory. I have courses coming very soon. I have all kinds of fun stuff. And I specifically have a quiz connected to this video so you can review exactly what we did in this video in a link in the description below. So definitely check that out. I'm going to be making more videos that are like this where we sort of break down what's in a chord, and because right now we really just talked about what upper extensions are, and then we just talked about altering different dominant 7 chords. So today we were really just talking about dominant 7 chords and altering them and adding upper extensions to them. But you know, I could make a whole video that just goes over types of major 7th chords and with all the different extensions on major 7th chords. Or I could talk about minor 7th chords or diminished chords with extensions, or anything is possible. There are a lot of chords we could get into. So if you like this video and you want to see more of these, let me know in the comments below, because I definitely can make this into a series and keep it going. Anyway, that is it for today, guys. If you are new to my channel, hello and welcome. My name is Gracie Terzian. I post videos once a week here on YouTube. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I would love to have you here as a subscriber. Be sure to turn on the bell notifications so you know when I post a new video. And remember, if you did like this video, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, share it with a friend. All those things help me out so much. I also have a Patreon where I have tons of different material. I even have a music theory collection on my Patreon that goes through all my music theory lessons with PDFs and quizzes, and it goes in a sequential order that builds on itself. So definitely check that out. Again, it's in a link in the description below. Check out my Patreon, check out the links to my courses. All that fun stuff can be found in the description below. Again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day or night, and I will see you guys next week.